the suspension circle, right? And then I go to my air brake hoses that lead me to my brake chamber to the push rod slack adjuster, right? Here, I'm gonna do it a little backwards. I'm gonna first talk about my air brake hoses, my brake, my dual air brake chamber, my slack adjuster, my push rod. After my push rod, instead of coming into my inner tire, I'm gonna talk about my suspension. Why? Because if you notice, look at where the air brake chamber is at. It's inside.
Okay.
So I'm working my way from in, out, and out to in here, and in here I'm gonna work my way this way. Make sense? And I'm only gonna give you the suspension, the first part on this side, right here, what we could see here. Once I'm done out here, I'm gonna give you the suspension in the back right here. Okay? Let me take a quick look just to see what I have to go by. All right. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay, on this one it's gonna be hard to point at stuff because it's in there, okay? But I'll try my best to do whatever I can. But that dual air brake chamber, the reason why I asked you guys to look at it is because it's hard to see it from here. Okay, ready? Here it goes. Okay, so right after I'm done with my axle, okay, I will check my air brake hoses. I'll check my air brake hoses. I want to make sure that they're not cut, they're not leaking any air, and that they're properly secured. From then on, I will check my dual air brake chamber. I'll check my dual air brake chamber. I want to make sure that it's not cracked, it's not leaking any air, and it's properly secured with the C-clamp. The next thing I would check for is my slack adjuster. I'll check my slack adjuster, make sure it's not cracked, and with the brakes released, I will pull on my slack adjuster to make sure I don't have no more than 1 inch of play. The next thing I would check for is my push rod. I'll check my push rod. I want to make sure that my push rod isn't cracked or bent, and it's properly secured with the clevis pin and a safety pin. The next thing I would check for is my leaf spring mount. I'll check my leaf. Oh, hold on. No, sorry. It's not a leaf spring mount. The next thing I would check for is my suspension mount. I'll check my suspension mount. Want to make sure that it's not cracked. Want to make sure there's no loose or missing bolts, and it's properly secured. Then I'm gonna check my torque rod. It's that rod right there. I'll check my torque rod. Want to make sure that it's not cracked or bent, there's no loose or missing bolts, and it's properly secured. Then I'll check my rocker arm. This part right here. I'll check my rocker arm. Want to make sure it's not cracked. Want to make sure it's not bent, there's no loose or missing bolts, and it's properly secured. From here, I'm gonna come into my inner tire. I'll check my inner tire. Want to make sure that my inner tire, I don't have any ABCs, no abrasions, bubbles, or cuts. I'll check my inner rim. Want to make sure that it's not cracked or bent, and it's free of any illegal welds. Then I'll check my brake drum. Want to make sure that my brake drum is free of any cracks, that's free of any debris, and free of any fluids. Then I'll check my brake lining. And I want to make sure that I have no less than 1/4 of an inch of brake lining. Also want to make sure that it's not cracked. From here, I'll come to the top of my tires. And I'll check them street to street to make sure I don't have any glass, screws, or nails, or anything that could puncture my tires. I'll check the tread depth of my tires. I should have no less than 2/32 of an inch of tread depth for my drive axles, or for my back wheels. Okay, 2/32. These could be recapped. I will thump my tires daily to check for improper inflation, and once a week with the tire gauge. From here, I'll come in between my duals. I'll check in between my duals. I want to make sure that in between my duals that it's free of any debris, and I'll check in between my rims to make sure I don't have any daylight in between my rims, because these duals are in a bud system and there should be no daylight in between my rims. I'll also make sure it's free of any debris and that my tires are not touching or rubbing against each other. From here on, I'm gonna come to the outer wall of my tire, make sure that I don't have any abrasions, bubbles, or cuts. I'll check my rim. Want to make sure that it's free of any cracks, that it's not bent, and it's free of any illegal welds. I do want to mention that I'll check my valve stems. I have an inner and an outer valve stem. I have 2 valve stems. I want to make sure that they're not cracked. And the valve stems, one's here and the other one is down there. I have 2 valve stems. I want to make sure that they're not cracked. They're not leaking any air. They're not loose. They're properly capped and they have proper clearance from the rim. The next thing I would check for is my lug nuts. I'll check my lug nuts. Want to make sure they're not loose or missing and they don't have any rust or any rust streaks that can indicate looseness. The next thing I would check for is my axle seal. I'll check my axle seal. Want to make sure it's not cracked, it's not leaking, there's no loose or missing bolts, and it's properly secured. From here, I will check my U-bolts that are right behind my wheels. I'll check my U-bolts. Want to make sure that they're not cracked, there's no loose or missing nuts, and they're properly secured with 4 nuts. Then I'll check my shock absorber. I'll check my shock absorber. Want to make sure that it's not cracked, it's not leaking, there's no loose or missing bolts, and it's properly secured. From here, I'll check my airbag. I'll check my airbag. Want to make sure it's not cut, there's no abrasions, bubbles, or cuts, it's not leaking, and it's properly secured. I'll check my upper and my lower airbag mounts. Want to make sure they're not cracked, there's no loose or missing bolts, and they're properly secured. From here, I will tell the examiner I would check this set of duals the same way I check this set of duals. Would you like me to check this set of duals? And they'll probably, if you didn't miss anything, they'll probably tell you to move on. Okay? From here, I'll check my tie down hooks. I'll check my tie down hooks. Want to make sure that they're not cracked, there's no cracked or damaged welds. They're free of any excessive wear and they're properly secured. I'll check my rear clearance light. I do want to mention that it's red to the rear, amber to the front. I want to make sure that they're not cracked. I don't have any cracked, loose, or missing lenses, and they're properly secured. Here I have my strobe light. I'll check my strobe light, amber in color. Want to make sure it's not cracked. I don't have any cracked, loose, or missing lenses, and they're properly secured. Then I have my splash guard. I'll check my splash guard. Want to make sure it's not cut, it's not hanging, there's no loose or missing bolts, and it has proper clearance from the tire. From here, we're going to move on to the back of the vehicle. The first thing I would check for is my strobe lights in the back. I want to make sure that they're not cracked, I don't have any cracked, loose, or missing lenses, and they're properly secured. Then I'll check my tail lights. I have my tail lights, 4 of them. Want to make sure that they're not cracked. Want to make sure I don't have any cracked, loose, or missing lenses. They are red in color and that they're properly secured. I do want to mention that my tail lights function as my turn signals, my brake lights, my 4-way flashers, and the white ones at the bottom, they work as my reverse lights. From here, I'm going to check my tailgate. Want to make sure that it's not cracked. There's no cracked or damaged weld, and it's free of any holes. I'll check my tailgate locks. I want to make sure that it's not cracked. Want to make sure that it's properly secured in the lock position. The next thing I would check for is my DOT reflective tape. I'll check my DOT reflective tape. Want to make sure that it's clean and visible and of the proper color. Then I'll check my apron. Want to make sure it's free of any cracks, there's no cracked or damaged welds, and it's free of any debris. From here, I'm gonna come under. I will check my back plate. I'll check my back plate. Want to make sure that it's not cracked. There's no cracked or damaged welds on it, and it's properly secured to my frame. I'll check my electrical hookup. I'll check my electrical hookup. Want to make sure that it's not cracked. There's no loose or missing bolts, and it's properly secured with its spring-loaded latch. I'll check my glad hands. I'll check my glad hands. Want to make sure that my glad hands are not cracked. Want to make sure that they're not leaking. And I'll also check the rubber seal to make sure that my rubber seal isn't cut, torn, and it's properly secured. From here, I'll check my pintle hook. I'll check my pencil hook. Want to make sure that it's not cracked. There's no loose or missing bolts. It's free of any excessive wear, and also is properly secured in the lock position. Because remember, it's going to be hooked onto the trailer in the lock position. The next thing I would check for is my D-ring mounts. I'll check my D-ring mounts. Want to make sure that they're not cracked. I don't have any cracked or damaged welds, and it's properly secured. I'll check my D-rings. I'll check my D-rings. Want to make sure that my D-rings are not cracked, and also want to make sure they're free of any excessive wear. From here, the next thing I would check for is my license plate light. I'll check my license plate light. Want to make sure that my license plate light isn't cracked. I don't have any cracked or missing lenses, and it's properly secured. I'll check the electrical lines and want to make sure I don't have any cut, burnt, or exposed wires, and they're properly secured. I'll check my license plate. I'll check my license plate. Want to make sure it's clean and visible. There's no loose or missing bolts, and it's properly secured. From here on, I would like to mention the differences. At this point, I would inspect the passenger side of my vehicle the same way I check my driver's side of my vehicle, but here I will name the differences. The only differences I have here, I got a storage box. I'll check the storage box. Want to make sure that it's properly secured, free of any cracks. There's no loose or missing bolts, and it's properly secured. I do have my step ladder here. I'll check my step ladder. Want to make sure that my step ladder, there's no cracks. I want to make sure it's properly secured in the stored position. And I got my exhaust. I'll check my exhaust. Want to make sure that it's free of any cracks. And also I will check for any soot that could indicate leaks, and that it's properly secured. Then I have my heat shield. I have my heat shield. I want to make sure it's not cracked, there's no loose or missing bolts, and it's properly secured.